Did you know that a woman, with courage and cunning, was able to overthrow a powerful empire at the height of its greatness? A woman who, with her army, defied religion and forever changed the course of Ethiopian history. The story of Gudit, the warrior queen who seized the throne of Aksum, will amaze you. Now, before you continue on this fascinating journey, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, like it, and comment on what you think of this fearless queen. This will greatly help the channel grow and bring you more stories like this. Let's keep going. Now, imagine yourself in the heart of Africa, where gigantic empires stretched across vast lands and the struggle for power was relentless. At the center of it all was Gudit, a woman who not only challenged the norms of the time, but also destroyed an empire that seemed unshakable. Aksum, the strongest kingdom in the region, was in decline. Corruption was eroding its foundations, and Christianity was trying to assert its authority. And it was in this moment of fragility that Gudit saw the chance to change history. With impressive strategic skill, she rallied her people, and in a devastating blow, invaded the city of Aksum. It was not just a military victory, but a revolution that challenged the region's religious beliefs and power structures. Gudit not only destroyed the symbols of Aksum, but also ushered in a new era of power and cultural renewal. The Empire of Aksum, at the height of its greatness, was an unparalleled power in ancient Africa. Located in what is now Ethiopia and parts of Eritrea, Aksum was renowned for its thriving trade, impressive architecture, and above all, its military strength. For centuries, the empire remained one of the most advanced civilizations on the African continent, being one of the first to adopt Christianity as its official religion in the 4th century. Its coins, grand buildings and trade network, which stretched across the Red Sea to Egypt and India, made Aksum a center of power and influence. Aksum's power began to weaken. By the time Gudit appears in history, the empire was already facing serious internal problems. Corruption had infiltrated the highest levels of government, and Aksum's rulers were losing control over their more distant provinces. As a result, the unity that once defined the empire began to dissipate. The local elite, more focused on internal disputes and their own interests, could no longer maintain the cohesion necessary to sustain Aksum's greatness. Furthermore, religious tensions began to rise. Although Christianity was already predominant, ancient African beliefs and paganism never completely disappeared, creating a climate of religious instability. And amid this chaos, Gudit saw her chance. She exploited not only the empire's political weakness, but also the religious divide to challenge Aksum's authority. In a moment of vulnerability, she managed to gather significant strength and launch her offensive against the empire. Gudit's attack was not just a military invasion, it was a cultural revolution. She didn't just win battles, but destroyed Aksum's symbols of power, including its temples and sacred images. She challenged the Christianity that had been imposed on the inhabitants of Aksum, re-establishing older cults and creating a groundswell of support among those who opposed the new religion. In many ways, she was a leader who not only attacked an empire, but also altered the very way of life of the people who inhabited it, changing the religious, social, and political foundations of ancient Egypt. What began as an inevitable decline for Aksum turned into an existential crisis with the arrival of Gudit. The city, once a thriving center, was sacked, and many of its temples and sacred monuments were destroyed, creating a sense of the end of an era. Not only were Aksum's armies defeated, but the very spirit of the empire was shaken. But amid the destruction, a new question arose: what would happen after the fall of Aksum? With the collapse of an empire, the power vacuum often creates space for new forces, and the question that arose was whether Gudit would be able to consolidate her power and establish a new empire, or whether the kingdom would fall back into fragmentation. How would she maintain her power? Would the rulers of other regions accept her rule? Gudit's rise to power was not merely a military conquest, but a veritable cultural and religious revolution that shook the foundations of the Aksum Empire. Her invasion of the capital was not merely a victory over the Aksumi armies, but a complete destruction of the dynasty that ruled the region. Gudit, with her courage and determination, was not content with simply defeating the empire. She destroyed symbols of power, plundered temples, and attacked the very identity of Aksum, which for centuries had been a beacon of power and faith for the people of the region. By seizing control of Aksum, Gudit not only defeated his enemies but also directly and dramatically challenged the established religious and political order. Aksum was a center of Christianity on the African continent, and Gudit's destruction of temples and religious icons in the name of a different cause was a severe blow to the religion, which was beginning to take root in the empire. She not only opposed Christianity, but also restored ancient African beliefs to the region, often associated with pagan cults and traditions. Aksum of corruption and weaknesses. To those who supported her, she was a heroine, a leader who restored the people's true culture and traditions. But to Christians and defenders of the Aksumite Empire, Gudit became a villain, a ruthless figure who destroyed what had been so painstakingly established. The simple act of destroying the symbols of the empire and reversing Christian influence led to her being seen by many as the destroyer of a glorious era and a symbol of rebellion against what was being built in Aksum. However, the question is, Gudit, was she a destroyer or a reformer? Her reputation as a dynasty breaker may have been exaggerated by those who saw her rise to power as a threat, but the impact of her actions cannot be underestimated. She brought about a radical transformation in politics and religion, and her legacy endured long after her victory. Looking at Gudit's story, we can understand that she was not just a conqueror, but a complex and multifaceted figure. Although she destroyed the Aksum dynasty, she also brought something new, something the region's inhabitants needed, a new identity, a new order. But this new order would come with its own challenges. How would Gudit deal with internal divisions and the external forces opposing her rule? Despite her meteoric rise and the dramatic changes she brought to the kingdom of Aksum, Gudit remains a mysterious figure, with few concrete historical records about her life and reign. This is largely due to the fact that she left few written documents, and over the centuries, her story was told and retold through oral legends and accounts from outside sources. What we know about Gudit, therefore, comes from imprecise and often contradictory accounts, which contributes to her enigmatic status in Ethiopian history. Most information about Gudit comes from accounts that describe her as a powerful and warrior woman, but there is no consensus on her origins, her lineage, or even her true identity. Some sources suggest she was of noble birth, while others say she was a leader of a subjugated people who rebelled against the Aksumites. Whatever the truth, the fact remains that Gudit emerged at a time of great instability, and she seized this opportunity to challenge an empire that seemed invincible. Unlike many rulers of the time, Gudit did not leave behind a series of monuments or grandiose records detailing her administration or victories. Aksum, on the other hand, was famous for its monumental architecture and inscriptions celebrating the empire, but Gudit did not seem to care about these aspects. Her goal seemed more pragmatic. She wanted to restore power to her people, destroy the symbols of the old order, and establish a new system more aligned with her own beliefs and ideals. Furthermore, the lack of contemporary records about Gudit also reflects the fact that she was a polarizing figure. To those who lost the power and symbols of their religion, she was a ruthless destroyer. To her followers, she was a reformist queen, someone who challenged a corrupt empire and brought freedom and power back to her land. This dualism between destruction and restoration is what makes Gudit such a fascinating and at the same time mysterious character. This mystery surrounding her has fueled debates about the nature of her reign. While some see her as a great leader who transformed the region, others see her as a fearsome figure whose impact was more destructive than constructive. Lacking clear evidence about her actions and decisions, Gudit's image has been shaped by legends and myths, which have only added layers to her character. Gudit's story is immortalized in Ethiopia's collective memory. Her rise to power, her destruction of the Aksum Empire, and her ability to change the region's religious and political structure make her a figure that cannot be ignored. What remains of her reign, however, remains an open question. How did she rule after the fall of Aksum? What was her vision for the future of her people and the kingdom she had conquered? As Gudit established herself as the region's new sovereign, her image was constructed in a polarizing manner. For many of her opponents, she was a ruthless tyrant, a woman who didn't hesitate to destroy an empire that, until then, seemed invincible. After destroying Aksum's temples and religious symbols, she became known as the Merciless Queen, a destroyer who had no compassion for those who followed Christianity, the empire's official religion. Gudit's battle wasn't just against an army, it was a war against Aksum's very religious and cultural identity. This myth of a cruel queen spread not only among Gudit's enemies, but also among Axum's own subjects, who were forced to submit to a new order. For those who were defeated, Gudit's image became a figure of terror. The destruction of temples, the expulsion of Christian religious leaders, and the implementation of ancient pagan beliefs were described as acts of barbarity. She was portrayed as a ruthless woman, willing to sacrifice everything for her convictions. However, Gudit's image as a ruthless figure was shaped largely by the accounts of those who suffered her actions. Many contemporary Christian sources, who viewed the destruction of churches and the rejection of Christianity as acts of violence, wrote accounts that exaggerated her cruelty. The destruction of Axumite temples, the broken religious icons, and the pagan cults she restored made her a figure of terror for many. However, a deeper analysis of Gudit's actions reveals a more complex character. Gudit was not simply a tyrant. By destroying the empire and its symbols, she may have seen it as a form of purification, a way to eliminate the corruption and weaknesses that had infiltrated Axum. She was not simply taking revenge on a religion or a culture. For her, what was at stake was much deeper, a desire to restore true order and true culture to her people. On the other hand, this construction of her image as a cruel and merciless leader can also be attributed to the resistance she faced. Those who lost power with her rise needed to justify the fall of the empire and the shift in power. To this end, Gudit's figure was portrayed in an exaggerated and demonized way, as a woman who brought destruction and death. Perhaps in the eyes of those who saw her as a threat, she needed to be labeled this way, so that her revolutionary act would be seen as not only unacceptable, but monstrous. Gudit not only physically destroyed Axum, but also challenged a religious and social order that had been built over generations. She directly touched on issues of faith and identity, something that always creates divisions. Her impact cannot be seen simply as destruction. To her followers, she was a revolutionary who restored true African culture and freed her people from outside influence. To her enemies, she was a ruthless figure, capable of destroying an entire civilization in the name of her own ideals. But looking at her story, the question remains, who is the real Gudit? The ruthless villain who destroyed everything in her path, or the leader who had the courage to defy a corrupt empire and stand against established norms? Was what she did truly necessary, or were the destruction and suffering she caused inevitable consequences of her struggle for power? Gudit's rise to power was not just a military victory, but a profound cultural and religious revolution that transformed the Axum region. Axum, one of the largest centers of Christianity in Africa, was shaken by the arrival of Gudit, who challenged the established religious order and revived pre-Christian religious practices that had been suppressed by the Axumite Empire. Christianity had established itself as the official religion of Axum, but upon seizing control, Gudit not only destroyed Christian temples and symbols, but also restored the ancient cults of his ancestors. This had an immediate and profound impact on the region, especially at a time when religion was one of the greatest unifying forces in an empire. By rejecting the Christian faith and returning to traditional practices, Gudit was not only rejecting a foreign religion, but also reaffirming the cultural identity of his people, which had been marginalized. For many, this represented an attempt to re-establish the power and dignity of ancient African traditions, something that Axum, with its conversion to Christianity, had begun to suppress. While Axum had been a prosperous empire, with great trade and influence in Christianity, Gudit demonstrated that an empire's strength comes not only from its military or economic power, but also from its ability to maintain its cultural and spiritual roots. By destroying the symbols of Axum, she was, in effect, saying that what mattered to her was authenticity and the preservation of her people's true identity, not the adoption of an external faith that did not correspond to their original values. The restoration of ancient cults and the promotion of traditional religious practices caused great divisions. For Christians, the change was seen as a painful loss, a denial of a faith that had long been officially accepted and practiced. But for Gudit's followers and those who opposed the growing Christian influence, she was seen as a liberator, someone who brought true culture back to her people. Gudit was not only a warrior, but also a cultural and spiritual leader who understood the power religion had over people. By challenging religious authority and promoting an identity more connected to African traditions, She sparked a religious revolution that reverberated for many years. Even after her death, Gudit's legacy and her attempt to re-establish traditional religion had a lasting impact on the region. Gudit's influence was not limited to the religious realm. The way she challenged the political and social order of Axum while restoring ancient customs and beliefs made her a central figure in the formation of the cultural identity of a new Ethiopia. She was undoubtedly a symbol of resistance against the imposition of a foreign religion, but also a figure of radical change who shaped the region's history in profound and lasting ways. His rise not only brought about the end of Aksumite rule, but also altered the way people viewed the very structure of power and identity within the empire. African traditions, previously suppressed, resurfaced with a vengeance, forever changing Ethiopia's cultural and religious foundations. Gudit's struggle was not simply a battle for land or power, but a struggle to redefine his people's identity in the face of a new religious and political order. One of the main reasons Gudit was able to conquer the Axum Empire and alter the region's religious and political structure was her incredible military strategy. She was not only a fearless warrior, but also a clever leader who knew how to exploit her enemies' weaknesses to her advantage. Her rise was not the result of sheer brute force, but a series of calculated moves and a deep understanding of geography and the psychology of war. Gudit knew that to overthrow an empire like Axum, she would need more than just a well-trained army. She needed allies, innovative tactics, and the ability to effectively mobilize her people. With her charisma and strategic skill, Gudit managed to assemble a strong and well-organized army, composed not only of warriors from her own people, but also of those dissatisfied with the Axum regime and its oppressive practices. Her ability to unite different factions and lead effectively was key to her military success. She used guerrilla tactics and surprise attacks to destabilize the empire. Rather than engaging the Axumite armies in a traditional direct confrontation, Gudit exploited her enemies' weaknesses and launched a series of swift, decisive attacks, striking strategic points and destroying symbols of power that further weakened Axumite morale. She understood the psychology of war. A spiritually defeated army would be much easier to defeat. Furthermore, Gudit knew how to exploit Axum's internal instability. The empire was fragmenting due to political conflicts and religious tensions, with many people within Axum dissatisfied with the imposition of Christianity. Gudit realized this was the perfect opportunity to act. She not only physically attacked the capital, but also used Axum's political weakness against itself, creating a situation in which the population itself turned against its ruler. Gudit's strategy was her understanding of the terrain. The Axum region, with its mountains and valleys, offered advantages to an army that knew how to navigate it. She used geography to her advantage, striking quickly and accurately, leaving little room for Axum to react. Furthermore, Gudit was astute enough to understand that war was not limited to the battlefield. She understood that propaganda and symbolic actions were also key to consolidating her power and further dividing her enemies. Her military strategy was not only about physical destruction, but also about creating a power vacuum and manipulating the political situation. By weakening her enemies not only on the battlefield but also within their institutions, Gudit ensured that, after the fall of Axum, her rule would be sustained for a considerable time. She knew that an empire is maintained not only by strength, but also by the ability to maintain the control and loyalty of the population. Gudit's history is shrouded in mystery. A crucial aspect of her reign was her family, and how she used familial relationships to strengthen her power. Gudit's dynasty is not widely documented, but it is possible that she formed strategic alliances through marriage and family relationships, something common in many ancient cultures. However, the lack of clear records about her lineage and family structure leaves many unanswered questions. Upon assuming power, Gudit likely had to navigate the complex internal relations within his own kingdom. Although he conquered Axum with his military might and strategic tactics, ruling an empire isn't limited to war. It was necessary to ensure internal stability and ensure that the different groups and factions within the kingdom were aligned. Gudit's family likely played a central role in this process. Marriage was an important political tool in the ancient world, and many leaders used marriages to form alliances with other peoples or powerful families. It's possible that Gudit used strategic marriages to unite rival factions or strengthen his position within society. These marriages could also have served as a way to secure loyalty and support during his reign, helping to maintain peace and internal stability. Furthermore, Gudit's relationship with his sons and the succession of power would be another important concern. In many ancient cultures, succession to the throne could be a contentious and risky issue, especially in a newly conquered empire. Gudit's descendants, his sons and heirs, were likely viewed as potential rivals by other leaders, both within and outside the kingdom. Ensuring that his sons and family had sufficient support to maintain his authority would be a constant challenge for Gudit. While it's unclear how many children Gudit had, succession was a critical point for her dynasty. If she had capable sons to lead, she could ensure her legacy would last longer. But the lack of concrete information about Gudit's family suggests that her dynasty may not have lasted long after her death, or at least not in a visible and documented way. Difficulties in maintaining power and ensuring a stable succession are common problems in many conquered empires, and Gudit would not have been immune to these challenges. Succession, therefore, was not just a matter of inheriting the throne, but of ensuring that family alliances were strong enough to secure the rule of her empire after her death. This aspect of Gudit's life is also one of the areas where history remains vague and rife with speculation. Without a clearly established or recorded lineage, the question of who succeeded Gudit, or whether she succeeded in creating a lasting dynasty, remains unanswered. Gudit's death, like many aspects of her life, is shrouded in mystery and legend. There are no clear records of the circumstances surrounding her death, leaving her departure as enigmatic as her rise to power. Some sources suggest she died in battle, in a confrontation that may have been an attempt to further consolidate her power, while others indicate she died of natural causes after a long and tumultuous reign. Versions of her death vary depending on the source. Some accounts, fueled by a Christian narrative, suggest that she was murdered by a traitor within her own circle, or that her death was part of a conspiracy led by those who wanted to restore Christian order in Axum. On the other hand, sources sympathetic to her actions describe her death as a natural occurrence, perhaps marked by illness or simply old age, as would be expected for a woman who ruled for so many years with such power. This lack of clarity about how Gudit died has spawned many theories over the centuries. To her followers, Gudit was an invincible figure, and her death seemed almost unreal, as if such an imposing woman could not have a simple departure. To her enemies, the lack of clear records of her death helped fuel the myth that she never actually died, but rather became a legendary figure, with her spirit watching over the kingdom for all eternity. The mystery of her death is also reflected in the impact it left on her succession. Without a clear line of succession, Gudit's death created a power vacuum, which in turn may have led to the fragmentation of the empire she so hard won. Even though she managed to create a solid power structure during her reign, the absence of a strong heir and the lack of a recognized lineage certainly contributed to the empire's fragility after her death. After her departure, internal divisions grew, the empire's instability intensified, and opposing forces, both internal and external, seized the opportunity to fight for power. Gudit may have conquered Axum, but her death without a clear successor resulted in the rapid collapse of her empire, with the forces she had defeated seeking to regain supremacy in the region. In any case, what remains clear is Gudit's enduring legacy. Her death, shrouded in mystery and legend, did not erase the impact of her reign. She remains a central figure in Ethiopian history, both as a symbol of resistance and power. Her life and death, entangled in myth, created a narrative arc that, though incomplete, still resonates for centuries. The void left by her absence generated a new phase of power struggles in the region, but at the same time, it ensured that her legend never faded. Despite the legends surrounding his rise and death, Gudit's impact on the history of Ethiopia and the region is undeniable. His figure, marked by both destruction and renewal, left a lasting mark on the culture, politics and religion of the region, one that would continue to be felt for generations. Axum Empire and challenging Christianity, Gudit profoundly altered the course of Ethiopia's religious and cultural history. Her actions in destroying temples and re-establishing ancient African beliefs made her a polarizing figure. To her supporters, she was a liberator, a woman who revived ancestral traditions and gave her people the chance to reconnect with their cultural identity. To Christians and those who saw Axum as a symbol of religious greatness, she was a ruthless destroyer, a figure who undid what had been built for centuries. Despite the lack of detailed information about how Gudit ruled, or the duration of his empire, the fact remains that his reign represented a break with the ancient order of Axum. His conquest not only destroyed an empire, but also demonstrated to the world that a ruler's strength lies not only in his ability to win battles, but also in his ability to shape the culture and identity of a people. Axum Empire and the rise of Gudit, the region entered a period of instability, but her figure continued to be revered by many as a symbol of resistance. Her story was passed down from generation to generation, taking on mythical proportions, and she was often remembered as one of the most powerful women in African history. Gudit's legacy, therefore, was not only military or political, but also cultural and symbolic. Furthermore, Gudit's impact was reflected in the region's political dynamics. Although the empire she built did not last long after her death, the seeds of her cultural and religious revolution were planted. The return to African beliefs and the questioning of Christian authority in Axum helped shape Ethiopia's religious future. Even though Christianity eventually re-established itself as the dominant religion, African practices and beliefs remained an important part of Ethiopian culture. Her figure has, over time, become a symbol of freedom and cultural identity for Ethiopians, especially during periods of foreign oppression or internal challenges. Gudit's story has been reinterpreted at different points in history, depending on the political and social context, but her image as a strong, fearless woman willing to fight for her people has remained a constant. Although it is unclear what became of her empire after her death, Gudit's memory continues to be celebrated. Her impact, though perhaps ephemeral in terms of the duration of her power, was profound in how she challenged the established order and provoked reflection on cultural identity and resistance against external forces. What remains of Gudit is a legend of a woman who not only challenged an empire, but also rewrote the rules of her time. Gudit's reign occurred at a crucial moment in Ethiopian history, when Christianity was consolidating its position as the dominant religion, especially after the conversion of the Axum Empire in the 4th century. Gudit's rise to power and his resistance to Christianity marked one of the greatest points of religious conflict in Ethiopian history. By destroying Christian temples and restoring ancient cults, Gudit positioned himself as a figure of resistance against Christianity, which was beginning to take hold not only in Axum but throughout the Ethiopian Empire. Axum, under its Christian dynasty, had become a center for the spread of Christianity on the African continent, a meeting point between African and Mediterranean cultures. However, for Gudit, Christianity represented an external force, a religion that had been imposed on the African people, disregarding their ancestral traditions and beliefs. This troubled relationship with Christianity led to Gudit being seen by many as an anti-Christian figure. For her, the restoration of traditional cults was not just a religious movement, but a way to re-establish true African identity, a reaction against the imposition of a foreign faith. By attacking Christian symbols, she revived ancient pagan practices, many of which trace their deepest African roots, marking a difference not only religiously, but also culturally and politically. Gudit's opposition to Christianity resonated in historical narratives. While Christianity was establishing itself as the empire's faith, Gudit challenged the religious homogenization it was promoting, establishing the idea that the empire should have a plurality of beliefs. For her, Christianity should not be the only religious identity, and Ethiopian history should incorporate both Christianity and ancestral practices. Their enemies, of course, saw this movement as a threat to the established order and the religion they were trying to consolidate. Christianity, in its most organized form, had become the center of power of the time. For many historians and Christians of her time, Gudit was a threat to what they were trying to build in Axum, a woman who revived a primitive past in opposition to the progress and modernity of Christianity. Her struggle was thus a resistance not only to an empire, but to a faith that was trying to encompass and reshape Ethiopia's religious and cultural identity. But it's also important to note that Gudit wasn't completely against all external influences. Her rise to power was, in fact, a reaction to a system she considered corrupt and fragile. She wanted to reverse what she saw as the imposition of Christianity, but without losing sight of the need for a strong empire with its own cultural foundations. Therefore, Gudit wasn't a leader who completely rejected innovation. She knew that a strong Ethiopia would need to adapt to the times, but this must be done from its own roots. Gudit's figure also serves as a reflection of the tensions between Christianity and ancient African religions. She challenged the centralization of Christianity in Aksum's politics and society, and in turn faced the challenges of an empire that aspired to be modern, but still had deeply African roots. Her resistance can be seen as an early indication of a cultural and religious conflict that would continue to affect Ethiopia throughout its history. And Gudit's struggle to maintain her African identity would resonate for generations to come. Although Gudit was a central figure in Ethiopian history, her actual existence remains a subject of debate among historians and scholars. This is largely due to the lack of concrete historical records about her life and reign. Much of Gudit's story has been passed down through legends and oral narratives, leading many to question whether she was a real character or more of a mythological creation, conceived to represent resistance against the Aksum Empire and its religious impositions. The lack of contemporary written records mentioning Gudit has fueled this doubt about her existence. Most accounts of her life come from later sources, often Christian scholars, who viewed her destruction of the Aksum Empire as an act of rebellion against the religious order being established in the region. These Christian sources largely demonized Gudit, calling her a destroyer and cruel. The lack of documentation also means that details of her life, such as her origins, her lineage, and the details of her death, remain shrouded in mystery. Some historians question whether she was truly a woman, as traditionally portrayed, or whether her figure was a metaphor, representing a revolt against the oppression and decadence of the Aksum Empire. Gudit's figure, therefore, may have been, in part, a reflection of the popular imagination, transformed into a heroine or villain, as the narrative required. The concept of Gudit as a real or mythological historical figure is also closely linked to the idea of resistance and cultural identity. If she were a real figure, she would become an important symbol of resistance against Christianity and external domination in the empire of Aksum. Her story would represent the struggle to preserve ancient African traditions in the face of the influences of foreign religions, something that resonated greatly in the following centuries. However, if she is a mythological or semi-real figure, she can be interpreted as a symbol of the Ethiopian people's struggle for their cultural identity, an icon constructed over generations as a reflection of their aspirations and resistance. In any case, the fact that Gudit is such a mysterious figure only increases her fascination. Her story is riddled with gaps, but it is precisely this lack of clarity that makes her so intriguing. Gudit has become an archetype of female power and resistance, and even if her actual historical existence is uncertain, her presence in the Ethiopian collective memory is undeniable. She became a figure of struggle not only for her people, but also for her culture. The fact that she defied the great powers of her time, while remaining shrouded in mystery, makes her one of the most enigmatic figures in African history. Even without definitive documentation, Gudit remains a fundamental part of Ethiopia's historical and cultural fabric. Despite doubts about her actual existence, Gudit's impact on Ethiopia's cultural and religious context is undeniable. Even though she was a figure shrouded in mystery, her story of resistance and the cultural transformation she promoted endured for generations. What Gudit represented was not just a temporary shift, but a reinterpretation of the relationships between power, religion, and cultural identity. By destroying the temples of Aksum and challenging the growing influence of Christianity, Gudit not only weakened the Aksumite Empire, but also challenged its religious power. She restored traditional African beliefs that were being suppressed as Christianity established itself as the official religion of Aksum. Gudit did this not simply to return to the past, but as a way to assert an authentic identity closer to her African roots. Her resistance to Christianity was seen by many as a fight to preserve her people's culture and traditions, something that had a profound impact on subsequent generations. Her act of destroying Christian temples and restoring ancient pagan practices created a religious flashpoint that continued to affect Ethiopia for centuries. Although Christianity eventually made a comeback and established itself as the dominant religion, the scars of Gudit's religious conflict were felt. Even after her death, the divisions she initiated between Christian and African religions remained a challenge for subsequent rulers. Gudit's story, therefore, became one of the earliest narratives of cultural and religious resistance in Ethiopia. representing the struggle for power over cultural and spiritual identity. Furthermore, Gudit's actions also question the role of religion in political power. In many empires, religion and politics were deeply intertwined, with rulers' legitimacy often derived from their relationship with the divine. Gudit, by challenging this relationship and returning to local spiritual traditions, left a lasting mark on the way religion would be viewed in Ethiopia. She demonstrated that a people's political and cultural identity could be forged from their own beliefs and practices, not from the imposition of a foreign faith. This legacy of cultural and religious autonomy was fundamental in shaping Ethiopian identity for centuries to come. Gudit, therefore, became not only a historical figure, but also a cultural icon, a symbol of resistance against cultural and religious colonization. Her story resonated in times of oppression, making her an inspirational figure for those facing external forces attempting to suppress their identities. She not only altered the course of history in her time, but also helped shape Ethiopia's cultural narrative for centuries, remaining a symbol of the struggle for autonomy and the preservation of African traditions. Gudit's memory has been distorted and recounted in various ways. Her figure remains a reflection of Ethiopia's complex cultural and religious dynamics. The struggle between Christianity and African beliefs remained a prominent theme, and Gudit was one of the first to embody this struggle, leaving a profound legacy that transcended her own lifetime. Gudit's story, though shrouded in mystery, remains a powerful symbol of resistance. The struggle for autonomy and the preservation of Ethiopian cultural identity. Her trajectory, whether as a real historical figure or a legend, continues to resonate deeply in Ethiopia's collective memory and in the ongoing struggle for independence and freedom. Her image as a warrior who defied the empire of Aksum and resisted external influences remains a beacon of inspiration for those seeking to defend their own cultures, identities, and sovereignty. If you enjoyed this fascinating story about Gudit, his struggle, legacy, and impact on modern Ethiopia, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your thoughts. Which part of Gudit's story impressed you most? Let's talk and share more about this incredible historical figure. Stay tuned for more videos about other powerful figures in history who shaped the world with their actions. Until next time.